Hey guys, Eugene here. Sorry about my Batman-like voice, but it's the best I can do. Let's go ahead and get started. We're overviewing the tools in Sculptris. First off, let me say Sculptris is really intuitive, but then it's not that intuitive. Basically, you can do a whole lot. You can do a whole lot more if you dig a little deeper and learn a little more. Here's why I'd say it's intuitive. Let's say that before I'd heard anything and been taught anything, I could open up Sculptris. And as soon as I touch this grab tool and start dragging on this guy, it's crazy the stuff I can do. So it really feels like you can do a lot. Like, look, I made a star all of a sudden. And that's impressive. And it's true, like you can do a whole lot really, really fast. But there's a whole lot more features over here. And you can get trapped really easy. Like, let's say that you clicked on global, which I had clicked on originally. Look, now I'm just moving this guy up and down. All I can do is move him. And I'm trapped. I really am trapped unless I know what I'm doing. So I'm just kind of showing you how, you might feel like Sculptris is really easy to use, and it is. But it's also, if you don't really know how to use it, you can get lost really easy. So that's why I'm kind of trying to drill down and teach you a little bit more than what you're going to think you need to know. Because if you get trapped in here, you're going to be disappointed. And there's also features and things that you can do that make your life a lot easier. So let's go ahead and get started. First off, if you ever do something like this, you can press Control Z to undo everything, but you've only got a certain number of undos. So you can always just go over here, and we'll talk about these in a minute, and just click New Sphere, and then ask for a new scene. And you'll start right back where you were. All right, let's go ahead and start working our way through this PowerPoint slideshow I gave you. Here's all the tools. I do want you to notice something. I got this great illustration off the internet, but this is pretty much what you should expect, what you're seeing right here. And here's the names of everything. And you'll have access to this, but let's break this into, these are mainly brushes, and these are the sculpt controls for once you start sculpting. And these are the scene management tools. That's why they're divided up the way that they are. I've used color to try to help you separate these things out in your head. So let's look at brushes first. So chisel, or crease right here. Chisel align into the surface. Inverse mode, which is holding Alt, which you'll do a lot, takes a sharp ridge instead, or makes a sharp ridge instead. This tool is useful for actual creases, as well as defining shapes of various kinds. It can give more control than the draw tool provides when creating sharp edges. By default, you'll notice the draw tool is selected, so so maybe I should have talked about that first, but this comes straight from the manual from Sculptris. So crease is at the very top. What does it do? Well, it creates a crease. So if I go like that, it creates a crease, as you can see. If I hold down the Alt key, it'll actually create a little raised edge right there. By the way, if I want to rotate around this guy, I just click out here in space, left click, and I can rotate around. Little trick I talked about in class and I'll mention to you, it's not intuitive, is if you press Z, see how it adjusted me to the front? If I turn it to the side and press Z, it'll show me the right. If I go up, it'll show me the bottom. This is a big deal. Keep pressing Z so you know. So you can fix your orientation and basically create it's the equivalent of orthographic views. So if you want to see something from the front, scroll to the front, and to straighten it out, press Z, and it'll tell you that it's the front. If you want to see it from the side, scroll to the side and then press Z, and it'll show you this is the right side. So if I wanted to crease along this side, I could just go like this. And by default, symmetry is turned on. We'll talk about that later, but basically you only have to do half the work with symmetry on. So that's Crease. You can see how it works. How do you make this brush bigger and smaller? Now I've got a video on this, but I'm just going to use brackets, but obviously you can see right here you can make it bigger and smaller. Another way to do this is to press the space bar, and as you can see you can adjust the size and the strength right here with this guy. These two are the same thing. So that is Crease. We're not going to spend forever on each of these. Alright, let's move on to the next one. Draw. Sorry. This is the default drawing tool. It lifts the digital clay up from the surface of the model, or pushes it in if invert is active. Again, that's Alt. If a stroke crosses the same area multiple times, each time will build the surface up higher. This brush has the following options. Clay makes a flatter stroke that is limited in height and tends to fill in cavities before it builds vertically. You must let go of the mouse button to start a new stroke to get more height. Soft, a slight variation of clay with smoother edges. Let's see how this works. So we'll move over here to draw, and when I go across here you'll see how that area raises up. If I hold down Alt, it'll actually push back down. I know this is a mess. We'll learn to do a better job later. Yeah, I pressed spacebar there by accident. Let me press spacebar again to turn that off. Alright, so this is adding clay with each time I click. And if I hold down Alt, it'll subtract it. Now I also could have clicked invert, but keystrokes are much better. Alright, so this is a way of adding clay or subtracting clay. And right now clay is not checked, so let's click that. And here we go. I'm adding. And if I hold down Alt, I'm subtracting. By the way, it's worth mentioning at this point, we'll get to this later, I know, but if you click wireframe, you can see the mesh. I just happen to have that turned off. Again, we'll get to that. So that's draw. That's what that does. Let's go ahead and move on. By the way, the hotkey for that is D. Alright, so flatten. So flatten, it creates an imaginary plane as you move your cursor across the surface. The click where you start your stroke determines the height of the plane. Anything within the area of the brush will be pushed toward the plane, flattening the surface. As you move the cursor, the angle of the plane rotates to match the surface, but the height relative to the surface will remain the same. If you click Lock Plane when the modifier is active, the height and angle will be fixed in the position determined by the beginning of the stroke. This allows you to build up a large surface that is completely flat. The angle fall off. Use this when sculpting with the Flatten tool when you're working near corner in the model's surface. This modifier prevents the Flatten tool from distorting the surface that's on the other side of the corner. Let's go look at this. So here's my circle, and I'll go click on Flatten. So it should flatten this. Now right now it looks like angle fall off is checked. So I'll uncheck it. So nothing's checked. And I'm going to click, and as it said, it's just going to flatten that area out. Whatever's in that circle gets flattened. So that's what this does, is it flattens things out. Now if I turn on lock plane, does that, and let me back it up, Control Z a couple times. If I turn on angle fall off, it does this. Honestly, they just seem to do the same thing to me. Again, I'm learning Sculptris myself. I've used it before, but never as much as I am right now, and I practiced with it several times. I'm not seeing a huge difference with the lock plane on or off. Sure, there is one. It's just hard to recognize what it is. But you can definitely square things out a lot easier this way. Let's move on. The hotkey for that is F. Inflate. Inflate makes the surface within the brush area swell outwards like a balloon blowing up. This is very useful for enlarging or exaggerating any details that are already sculpted on the surface. The hotkey is C. So this is kind of like sculpt, or not sculpt, kind of like draw, just more powerful. Let's go take a quick look at it, huh? So here it is, inflate. So if I click here, it inflates out. And the strength of it appears to be in the center of the circle. And then if I hold down the Alt key, it'll do the opposite. It'll actually shrink in and pinch like that. And of course, that key would be called the next one we're talking about, which is pinch, which is kind of the opposite of inflate. Let's look at that. So pinch squeezes the surface inward towards the center of the brush position or stroke. It's exactly like pinching a bit of clay between your fingers. Pinch can be used to sharpen corners and creases, or in some cases to help straighten edges. Inverting this brush will push away from the stroke center, softening the surface. When used on an outside corner, it has an effect that's a bit like the inflate brush. This option can actually be quite useful for creating abstract shapes and patterns. Let's try it out. So I'm holding down Alt to pull this around. You don't have to press Alt though, you can just click out here off the object. But here we go, crease. So if I go like this, it pinches that edge, pinches it in. It's actually cleaning things up quite nicely, isn't it? By the way, if I press Z, that's the front. Let's roll it to the side. If I press Z, that's the side. Whatever you're creating at home might look totally different than mine, but I want you to know that the way I've built this thing, I've actually got a decent amount of control over it. So this is pinch. It's pinching the edges. If I hold down Alt, it should drag the edges out. So essentially, it's kind of just like bloat. Some of these tools definitely do what to me appears to be the same thing. Let's move on. That covers most of the tools except for one more, which is a very interesting tool. This guy is called Smooth. And that relaxes the surface, blurring details and averaging out elevations. This is similar to wetting your finger and running it over clay. Here we go. See all these bumpy edges? If I go grab Smooth, it should smooth those out. Now that really did a number on this thing. The strength is all the way down. As you can see here, we haven't learned about this yet, but it shouldn't really be doing so much damage. I'm going to just click real lightly. And as you can see, this is a very powerful tool. It did more than I actually wanted it to. But that's what it does. You can just make the circle smaller if it's killing you. That is your smooth tool. And those are all of your brushes, your basic tools. Crease, draw, inflate, pinch, and flatten. And of course smooth, which we just talked about. Actually, reduce shouldn't be in this part of the PowerPoint. It looks like I made a little mistake. Sorry about that. I'll have to move this. As you can see, reduce is actually part of the sculpt modes down here. Or it should be. Well, ignore this part for right now. Let's move on to the global brush tools. These are some powerful ones. When adding an object to the scene, the new geometry will automatically be selected and all transform tools will be placed in global mode with a pivot point at the center of the new object. This way you can conveniently move the object around and scale it until you're happy with its placement. For each of the following 3 brushes, scale, rotate, and grab, global controls can be turned on or off. When turned on, it will affect the entire mesh, regardless of brush size. When it's turned off, it'll only affect the area within the brush size, acting as a sculpting brush. So these can either be regular old brushes or global brushes. Let's describe what that means. I'll jump back into Sculptris for a minute. And as you can see, if I grab the grab brush, right now it's set to global. That means that I can move this guy up and down. But if I turn off global, I'll have a brush and I can drag out or up or in or whatever. The bottom line is it behaves like a brush. Global, it'll just move the whole guy up and down, just like that. Now rotate does that, and so does scale. So if I have global turned on with scale, I can make this bigger or smaller, just like that. Just click the screen and pull down, or click on the object and pull down. You can shrink it, make it smaller. Or left click and pull up and you can make it bigger. Or rotate, which will allow me to rotate the entire object based off a pivot point that is established wherever I click first. Watch me rotate this around. I'll press Z. And that's the right, and that's the front. As you can see, this is still saying pretty well oriented. That's rotate, scale. But if you turn global off, if I were to click at the very top of this guy, right, and I have scale chosen, I can just scale the very top of this, the part that was selected. Rotate, I'm sorry. Rotate the top of this, or scale just the top of this, which basically kind of behaves like bloat. Let's go read about these guys. I kind of dove into it there. Rotate twists the model or geometry. Click and drag to pull the handle out towards the circle, then drag around in any direction to control the angle. This feature is most useful in global mode, where it will ignore the brush size and operate on all selected areas. It works the same whether the selection is soft, created by painting on part of the surface, or whole, clicking on an object to select the entire model. Rotation takes place around the clicked point, relative to your viewing angle rather than the model's surface. Put another way, imagine that it's a disc spinning on the surface of your monitor and affecting anything that's behind it. If the selected region touches the symmetry line, rotation axis will be locked to X so it won't deform the object. If using ZBrush controls, which we're not, so we're going to skip that. The next one, and just to repeat that, like if I were to select scale, have it set to global, I could just rotate this guy around a pivot point that is based on wherever I clicked. Or I could turn this off and the rotation, and rotate the mesh that was inside the circle. And there you have it. Moving forward. Scale. By default, all geometry inside the brush will be enlarged or shrunk. The XYZ option locks all the axes together so it's a uniform scale in all directions at once. Without the option checked, this tool can scale freely sideways and vertically as you move the mouse. In all cases, the center point of the scaling will be the point clicked, unless the pivot is active due to global mode. In that case, the scaling will be relative to the object center. Let's just take a quick look at that. So here we go, scale. We'll check global, and like I did before, it'll make this bigger or smaller. Turn it off, we'll have this circle here, and scale will make it bigger or again smaller, but just the area you had selected. Now if I turn off X, Y, and Z, the scale is going to be a little wilder. I personally, at this point, don't ever turn off X, Y, and Z. I don't see the point. Yeah, I just keep them together. If you don't understand what X, Y, and Z are, those are mathematical axes. Basically up, down, left, right, and then the Z-axis is what makes 3D 3D. We don't have to get deep into it. This is just a quick overview, but I would just keep X, Y, Z checked so everything stays in proportion. All right, so we've learned everything about all of the basic brush tools and the global brush tools. Except for grab, I'm sorry. Let's mention grab here, and we have used it. Moves the region along the view plane or locked to the symmetry plane. Global mode, of course, affects the entire object. So limit, grab normally in a way that constantly deforms the surface as you move. This is useful for creating tentacles or flat structures and feels a bit like manipulating soft clay with your fingers. Limit changes this, allowing you to move the geometry around as much as you want to find just the right position before releasing the mouse and finalizing the new location. This is one of those deals you just want to look at and just use. So let me go grab this tool here. Sorry for showing you my emails there. Nothing interesting. So back to this guy, right? So let's say that I have the grab tool selected and I don't have a limit turned on. So I'm going to drag this out. And I have to drag it out once, twice, 3 times, and we start to see some real things happen here. It's like something happened with my keystrokes here. I turned on what's called a mask. Didn't mean to. I turned it off. I'll explain that problem later. Again, that's one of those things you can get trapped in, which is part of the reason you really want to watch these videos. But right now I don't have limit turned on. I'm just using the grab tool, and as you can see, I can drag this out just like that. Just click, then drag out. Now if I turn on limit, click, and drag out, I'm getting a little bit of a different effect. This drug out until I got these sharp little points. Limit only drags out so far and then stops. Honestly, I don't normally have a limit turned on. If I wanted to go like this and stop there, I just let go. But if you don't want sharp points on everything, or if you don't have a lot of control over what you're doing, I suppose turn limit on. All right, so all these tools are what you can sculpt with and make amazing things with. And I think that's a good point to stop this part of the video. So we'll pick up where we left off in a different video. Thank you for listening.